Perfect. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming to this webinar. Really excited to see you all, and thanks for taking time out of this Easter weekend to learn about executive functioning and what we can do about it. Because it's a fairly small webinar, our hope is to have a fair bit of discussion at the end, just because I think we have the opportunity to be able to do so. And also, I'm quite curious to hear everyone's perspectives as well. This is also the start of our partnership with Autumnly. So our plan is to basically first we'll talk about FSIM and what we do, and then transition into Amina then talking about Autumnly. And then afterwards, we'll have a discussion about sort of general executive functioning and the ADHD space. So I hope that sounds good for everybody.
Yeah, it's
And if you
perfect.
have any questions while we're doing our presentations, just please don't hesitate to just put them in the chat, and then those can be the first ones that we can address. Let me also just share my screen. All right. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Lovely. So I think the first thing that I really want to talk about is executive functioning. I think you've likely seen it in our LinkedIn posts and have seen us all talking about, different aspects of executive functioning. But at its core, essentially, it's a set of cognitive processes that help people manage and regulate their thoughts, actions to achieve goals and navigate daily tasks. And executive functioning is very much on a spectrum. Like if you are tired that day, you will struggle with executive functioning. If you are a lot of like women that go through menopause, for example, will report having difficulties with executive functioning. It's something that goes up and down throughout your life. But it's also something that tends to be affected for young people with ADHD. And that is often the biggest indicator of having ADHD is that sort of poor executive functioning. And the challenge is that executive functioning is often very difficult to assess via traditional interview-based methods because, people often find really good ways to cope and hide their executive functioning difficulties. Like, I have a horrible memory, I write everything down. People often don't realize that I could be struggling with that. And as a result, we wanted to find some way to measure executive functioning just a bit more directly and objectively, rather than essentially asking someone to report their own difficulties. So what we've developed is a gamified assessment tool called FSIM. Essentially, there's a dragon called Laura who gives the kids a list of things to do, and the child is in this home environment. And she might say, you need to wash your face, call your dad at 2 p.m., put your clothes away, put some soup on the stove. And as the child navigates these different tasks, the game looks at how they interact with it. So we look at, do they get distracted by the toys that are scattered around the room? Do they start playing with them rather than completing the tasks? Do they struggle with the time-based tasks? Do they struggle with um, getting lost around the room and being able to organize the tasks in an efficient manner? And at the end, we're able to generate all of that into these neurological performance indicators that basically show specifically where this person is struggling in terms of those executive functioning. And then we're able to show the likelihood of ADHD and that breakdown of executive functioning. And for us, what's really important is that we don't really want to be a diagnosis because, as I said earlier, executive functioning very much exists on a spectrum. And you could be, and I think ultimately it's not so much, the label of ADHD that affects one's ability to function in society, it's the executive functioning difficulties that they have. So for us, what's more important than necessarily the likelihood of ADHD is specifically where is this person struggling? Is it attention? Is it hyperactivity? Is it oh my gosh, planning and perspective memory? And the other thing is also oftentimes parents, when they find out that their child is likely to have ADHD, can feel quite overwhelmed. And they start reading everything about ADHD and having to basically go back and forth around whether or not they, reading everything about it and finding out which of those different aspects of ADHD is their child struggling with. But ultimately, here we can say, look, your child is likely to have ADHD. This is true. They're primarily struggling with attention and they're a little hyperactive. And that means that the parent now knows specifically what to focus on rather than feel like they have to deal with everything at the same time. We then also have a report for the parents, and that breaks it down just easier to understand language. We have some strategies and techniques for them, and we find that teachers often use this report. We've also found that actually having the same report for the teachers and the parents had a bit of a benefit that we weren't really expecting, which is that everyone's sort of on the same page and using the same language. We didn't really originally expect for our reports to be a sort of training for schools around executive functioning, but it seems to be that it's really encouraging schools to talk about that more. And schools really vary in terms of their understanding of executive functioning. There are some schools that are really good and they have really complicated ways of evaluating it and they're fine. But a lot of the schools we speak to do find that teachers are not aware of neurodiversity and may not be aware of executive functioning and need that additional support within the reports to be able to support the kids better in the classroom. What we also have found, interestingly enough, is that a lot of the times when we're speaking to the schools, they would use our reports for the referrals and for HCP plans. And what we had not realized was that fairly frequently schools would submit an HCP plan and it would be sent back because there either would not be enough evidence or conflicting information. And it seems to be that with the EFSM reports, the Senkos tend to see a decreased likelihood that the report is sent back, which saves them quite a bit of time. But also, again, it tends to result in a lot of alignment between the families and teachers and everyone within the school. We're also working to develop a needs-based support plan as well, so that we can move beyond just sort of suggested strategies and looking more at how can we individually recommend that you support this particular student, just because we've been seeing increasing numbers of schools developing their own executive function interventions. And ultimately, with EPSIM, it means that support can be provided to a child just so much sooner. It takes maybe a minute or so to create the user credentials, 25 minutes to play the game. You get the results automatically. And it means that even if a child is likely to have ADHD and still needs to be on the waiting list, at least now they're waiting with a whole bank of support strategies that can be used to support them. So for us, we do still think that diagnosis is, of course, important. Like labels are important. It is important to know whether or not someone has ADHD, but I think it's even more important to be able to support them more functionally while they're waiting for that diagnosis. And a brief background about us. So we were actually originally established in Finland. We work with over 100 schools there. We also are used by their university hospital and an ICB equivalent. We were funded by an Innovate UK grant that allowed us to do a pilot with about 40 schools in the Leeds and Yorkshire area. And that let us adapt our tool to the UK market and really understand what specifically schools needed, how they were different from the Finnish schools. And that has led to a larger pilot that we're finally starting with a West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board. In addition to that, we do still work with quite a few schools outside of that pilot, and also private practices and nonprofits as diagnostic support. And we're working with additional organizations around sort of pathway projects to look at the further support that we can provide. What's also interesting is some of the schools have started using us in a way that we weren't quite expecting either. So primarily we're used to look at specifically how is a child doing at a single point of time. So either kids that enter a classroom or there's concern about a particular child. But some schools are beginning to use us to look at progress. Because as you can see here, our reports are fairly quantitative. And it means that it's quite easy for schools to track progress. So there's a school that we work with that had developed a 12-week intervention, executive function intervention program, and that used EFSM to evaluate kids at the beginning and at the end, and were able to use EFSM to show evidence of that program being able to show measurable improvement for time management and attention. And in addition, we are also CE certified. We've got our UKC and DTAC. We've got all the certifications that we need to operate in the UK. And our most recent clinical trial shows that EFSM is able to reliably distinguish between kids with ADHD and typically developing children. And children also tend to find it fun to use, which, clinically doesn't really matter if an assessment is fun, but practically I think it does, especially as kids get older. So we've recently extended our age range to go up to 16. And I think with some of the older kids, it's really easy for them just not to engage and kind of shut down and sort of go through the motions of an assessment. And because it's a game, it really encourages kids to actually engage with it and provide more honest and accurate answers. And also with these kids, a lot of them are being evaluated for a lot of other things as well, and they might be feeling quite tired of the clinical feel of a lot of the assessments. And so I think having something fun and gamified is just a nice break from all of that. So ultimately, because it's a web game, kids can take it at home or in the school. They just need to be supervised. It provides that objective assessment of ADHD traits and supports a lot earlier diagnosis and treatment support. This was developed by quite a lot of different clinicians. And yeah, I think it can make waitlists a lot more pleasant for young people. And I think on our end, this is something that we can't really do alone because I think what's really important to know is FSIM is only, it's a tool. It's only as good as the people that are using it. And we very much only want to be providing the reports and the screening tool. And it's really important for us to work with partners like Autumnly, who can actually provide the further signposting, the further support for that young person. We primarily provide our tool either directly to schools or to providers like Autumnly that can provide further information for the families. And I think if we're able to work together, we can provide just much more supportive care to these young people. So yeah, I think I'll let people ask any like five if they have questions for about 5 minutes, and then I think I'll pass it along to Autumnly. That sounds good. Any questions? I'm gonna figure out how to stop sharing my screen in the meantime.
Yeah, so just going back to schools. So I know Amina, when I spoke to her, she briefly mentioned that it's a package price. I'm purely asking from a interest point of view because I know I can go back because I work with the alongside the Senko. I can go back and propose FSIM to the school that I'm at. So in terms of like pricing, can you discuss that now, or is it something that you discuss with the school going forward if they're interested, or?
So our pricing for schools tends to be an annual subscription, and that allows them to have unlimited tests. So that means that they can test as many times as they'd like, and that's really helpful for schools that are doing those sort of interventions, like I mentioned. It is also based on school size, because schools tend to have, different budgets based on how large they are. So it will vary on how large the school is. But let's say for a primary school that has maybe like 300 students, it'd likely be around £800. If it's 500, it would be closer to 1,200 or so. But it really depends on the number of students within that school.
Yeah, so I think the school that I'm at it's a follow through school, so we've got primary, junior, follow through to high school. We're probably looking at about just short of 1,000 students.
Okay.
So that's the scale of the school. But it is really interesting, and I know that it's definitely something that, schools can definitely benefit from, especially like you say, from an EHCP point of view, because I myself go through EHCP reports. Um, they're not always as easy as they're made out to be.
Yeah, no, I know. Our team was working on trying to really understand the HCB process, and it took us quite a few weeks, and we're still not fully clear on how it all works. So yeah, it's so complicated, and it seems like
Yeah,
each
it's
region is quite.
difficult because every teacher then has their own perception of the student or their own point of view of the capability of what the student can do. Or myself as a TA will see the student in a different, in a different light than what the teacher would. So it's really difficult to try and put together an EHC report that's gonna then be able to assess every aspect. Whereas with FSIM, I suppose that, it's a all in one place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, so Maya, we can chat if you're happy afterwards. If you can put your
Of
email
course,
into the
yeah.
chat about this a bit more. Okay, now I have a final question, Vanessa. Oh, hello.
Hello. I don't know whether you can see me. I don't know whether my camera's working, but hopefully my microphone's working. Yeah, nice to see you. I'm hugely impressed by this product. But I just wanted to understand when you've rolled it out in the schools, have they done the test environment with the students actually in school, or have some of them wanted to send the option to do it at home as well? What's been the general feedback?
Yeah, most schools will do it at the school. It's very, very rare for them to do it at home. I think with the older kids, that might become more common. But yeah, usually they like to do it because I think you get more from watching the child interact. We see a lot of, you're able to see how a child deals with frustration or difficulties. So I think it's helpful to observe the child that way. Usually, the at home offer is more beneficial for like nonprofits or charities or organizations where they just may not have access to that child, but then the parents would then supervise the child as they take the test. But yeah, usually it's done within the school.
Okay, and the parents of the children that are being selected to take the test, what's the feedback from them? Or is it positive that they're being looked at early, or have some of them been a little bit don't pick my child out of a bunch almost?
Yeah, I mean, feedback from parents has been really, really good. I think they really like having the support strategies. The parent report also does not have the likelihood of ADHD. So it's the clinician that would be able to see that. The parents would primarily just get support strategies and the breakdown of where the child is struggling. And parents seem to really like that because they don't necessarily have to see what's like the clinical bits that it might not that might kind of make them panic, but they see like what they can actively do to support the child at home.
Yeah, that's really helpful, isn't it? And interesting that they're finding new ways of utilizing the tool for sort of different measurements as well. That's
Mm,
huge that they're embracing it like that. Thanks,
yeah.
Harry.
No, of course, thank you. Yeah, Ilsa?
Thank you. Sorry, my camera isn't working. I know that's off-putting, but so my question is also about the support strategies and how they're received by. You've talked about just then how they're received by parents, but generally, how are they received by schools? And I assume are there support strategies that are given that are more directed to parents, and then some for the school? And kind of my reason for asking is. Um, Obviously with the needs led approach, but we've
Mm.
still got this kind of need for diagnosis in the background, whether schools, there are still some schools that would wait for the diagnosis to act on the support strategies and what the feedback has been around that.
Yeah. Usually what we find is they tend to be quite happy to have the support strategies. Um, there are some schools that might be implementing similar strategies potentially that has happened in the past, but usually they see strategies that they might have not have thought of or might not be aware of. So usually provide some with additional ideas for how to support the child. Oftentimes, the fact that the report is the same for the parents and teachers is helpful because it aligns everyone to just use the same language. Generally, what we find is Senkos really like it because oftentimes Senkos feel like they have a lot of pressure to be the ones, adapting the classroom, but this means that they can then give the report to the teacher and the teacher then sees clearly what do they need to do to support the student. And sometimes we'll have situations where a Senko might be saying the same thing over and over again to a particular teacher, and the teacher may be kind of beginning to not really listen because it's the same thing over and over again. But when they see a report, even if it contains similar information to what the Senko might have been saying, they tend to treat it with a bit more credence. So I think that so far that's been helpful.
Thank you.
All right, Amina, would you like to go?
Yeah, so my name is Amina, and I'm the co-founder of Autumnly, which essentially is a neurodivergent support platform for children and adults. And I kind of built the platform from my own experience navigating support for my daughter and kind of seeing how confusing and fragmented the system was. And one of our biggest goals was kind of to support people by through different formats, for example, so through education and content, like creating that awareness, also providing access to trusted, supportive professionals as well, who are neurodivergent affirming, because just from my own journey and some of the professionals that I've come into contact with, it can be very hit and miss sometimes. And I think what I was keen on doing was kind of having partnerships and collaborating with practitioners who kind of support neurodivergent people in a way that respects their differences. So rather than trying to like fix, suppress, or make them appear neurotypical. Um, so it's less about what job the professional does. Like it could be a therapist, a psychologist, an OT, but more about how they think and communicate and support. children and adults. So I kind of wanted to gather those professionals and also provide a sense of community on my platform because I think that's one of the most important things. Because it can be very isolating navigating this journey, and a lot of the people that I've chatted to have felt that same sense of isolation. So it's always nice when you can create a sense of community and just have a platform where you can all talk to each other, share experiences, concerns, and things like that. Um, so essentially, it is a private support platform that will help people navigate autism and ADHD, and we want to branch out into other types of neurodiversity as well. So on the platform, you can kind of start by asking questions, booking a one-off consultation, and then if you kind of need more ongoing support, there's also a membership with regular check-ins, resources, and access to specialists in different formats. Um, that was a really big thing for us because we wanted to offer different formats of support just for economic inclusivity because, there is an issue with price, of course, especially when you're supporting a neurodivergent child, for example. There's lots of private consultations that you might be going through and things like that. So we wanted to have different formats like workshops, Q&A sessions, and just support a different variety of services on the platform and kind of take a more holistic approach as well. So we want to explore different types of therapy modalities as well, things like creative therapies, and just expand. It's kind of like a hub for everything when it comes to neurodivergent support. I did want to load the website up now, but the developer's working on the pricing page, so there's an issue with the platform at the moment, so I can't do it today, but I will do it next time. But essentially, that is what the platform is. It's just a place to help people navigate neurodivergence. And like I said, it's for children and adults because I feel like the adult support landscape is very different. There's a lot of chat about like early intervention, but obviously neurodivergent children become neurodivergent adults and then the support kind of drops off. And oftentimes people don't know what support they're entitled to, what kind of support is out there. They may face issues with sort of work and discrimination. So it was important for us to also add legal professionals and lots of different types of support and just put everything in one place so it's not disjointed. Um, and if I go back to kind of like FSIM and why I've partnered or collaborated with them today, I think I kind of appreciate the way that FSIM talks about needs-based understanding, not just necessarily focusing on whether there's a diagnosis there, but kind of honing in on areas where a child may be struggling with and what kind of support is available for that. That's something I've seen in my own experience. Um, and just looking at the tool, it really does give a clear picture of how a child is thinking, planning, and managing things in real time. Um, and a lot of the families that I've spoken to don't have that level of clarity prior to having a diagnosis. So I think I really appreciate the way there's strategies in the report and it's proactive and there's ideas of things that you can do. Um, and obviously, in some cases, families want further personalized support, maybe to implement different strategies. And obviously, that's where the right professional can make a really big difference because with ADHD, support isn't one size fits all. And that's something our platform obviously recognizes. So, whereas a child might need help with emotional regulation, sometimes input from a therapist or a psychologist can help. Whereas another child might need support with attention, planning, organization, which are like core executive functioning skills, and sometimes coaching or occupational therapy can help just by breaking tasks down or building routines and supporting regulation. And obviously, in some cases, and some families that I've kind of spoken to, that support that they're looking for might be more educational, like working with tutors who are ADHD informed, which we also cover on the platform. So I think schools can kind of recognize potential needs. FSIM can support with identifying those needs, providing strategies, giving more detail. And essentially, it's just about accessing the right support and helping like families connect the dots and helping the child to thrive, basically. So yeah, that's why I was really attracted to this partnership. And I think obviously I built my platform from lived experience, and Ari also brings lived experience into FSIM. So there really was that shared understanding there. Um, but yeah.
Any questions for Amina?
Sorry, Ari, I'm desperately trying to find the hand button. I don't normally use Zoom, so I'm a bit of a noob for this one. Sorry. Amina, I wanted to ask you about the pricing structure a little bit for because it's a private platform. You
Yes.
said that initially there you can just go to the platform. Is that free and then the membership costs, or do you have to pay for all the different levels of access?
No, to go on the platform, it's free. So we have a form where people can talk about what kind of support that they're looking for. And sometimes people don't really know what they're looking for. They can just give you like a brief description of something they're struggling with, for example. And because we've got access to like our pool of professionals, we would be able to match them with a professional. And at the moment, the professionals are on the platform. There's no kind of extra fee or anything they're paying. So it would just be about connecting that person with the professional. The membership models are for people that kind of want more guidance, basically, and they want somebody to support them throughout their entire journey because people are often looking for different things. Sometimes, like, even for myself, sometimes I might just want a consultation, for example, with a speech and language therapist or a play therapist or something like that. But then there are other people, and I think I've seen it more so with adults who were recently diagnosed, for example, who want support with kind of processing the emotional side of things, and then, you know, somebody guiding them through those options. And what we build into the membership models as well is discounts for consultations. So there'll be
Hmm.
repeat consultations that they can have per month. So those things are being finalized at the moment. So when that's fully launched, going into, I think it's 2 weeks from now, I'll be able to give like a pricing structure, and an accurate breakdown. But yeah, there's different models. There's the membership, and then there's just like one-off consultations.
Okay, that's great. And you say it covers children and adults, so the
Yeah.
website looks very different for the two, does it?
Yes, yes. Because the needs are so different across
Yeah.
the two. Yeah.
Right. Well, I look forward to seeing it. It's a shame you couldn't show it today, but I
Yeah,
appreciate things are
sorry.
getting built.
Oh, and I think Ilse, you've got a question?
Yeah, I wondered, so how new is the platform, and do you know how many users you have at the moment?
So we have supported at the moment I have capacity to kind of anybody who comes through to the platform, I manage that myself. So because we have capacity at the moment, it's okay for me to do that. So I think in terms of back and forth communications of people that I'm chatting with at the moment, I think around in the 40, like about 42 different interactions. And sometimes it's just a quick question, sometimes it's people that are looking for community and things like that. Um, but I think in terms of people that I've connected to other professionals, that number kind of goes up. Um, but yeah, they'll just come through to the website and I will signpost them to people from our pool. I don't have the specific breakdown for adults and children because there's different people that are working on different things. But if you're talking about like how many people am I actively engaging with at the moment who we're kind of having conversations back and forth, it would be about 40, 42, 43. But in terms of people who have used the platform, that number is a lot higher. But that's just in terms of me connecting them with a professional.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess this is more of my question actually, Mina. What are your sort of your hopes for the future? Because I know Autumnly's launched fairly recently. When,
Mhm.
how long ago has Autumnly launched?
It's been it's been about a year where the platform has kind of been up, but I think in terms of launching it was this autumn where we
Mm.
started to have conversations and things. And my hopes mainly is for building the community at the moment and kind of expanding our reach. Um, because I think we're trying to change the way the support landscape is and that we're not trying to be too clinical and we're trying to just cover more ground when it comes to just having chats with people about things that they may be going through. and providing education as well. So I think my main goals are to expand on the education side of things, improve awareness, and let people understand what services are out there. Because oftentimes it's not that people don't want support, it's just about even knowing what support is out there. And I think it's the same when I've spoken to parents and I've spoken to adults. There's a real thing around awareness. And the second thing I wanted to do is provide education around therapy in particular, because I've spoken to a lot of adults who've had really bad experiences with therapy that kind of hasn't been neurodivergent affirming and it's kind of put them off. So I think my goal is to improve the community standpoint, provide more education, and just provide more personalized support for people and support that they can actually benefit from. Because I think a lot of us have struggled with um, perhaps engaging with the wrong professionals or therapies that weren't personalized. And that's what I really kind of just want to avoid.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you decide who to signpost to out of curiosity?
So we've got a team. I've got a pediatrician, so his name is Joe. So when it comes to kind of like medical queries and things like that, he works on it. I also have a psychologist, clinical psychologist that supports with the more therapy types of things. And then I have professionals that work with children when it comes to like play therapy, occupational therapy. So in our pool of people, we can kind of signpost depending on what the query is about. And if there's any concerns or anything like that, we just kind of discuss it amongst ourselves. But yeah, we do have that mix of like clinicians and then people that are working every day with children and things like that. So amongst ourselves, we can decide.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And because I feel like it often, at least to me coming to the UK, sometimes it
Mhm.
does feel like a lot of signposting is just sort of like links on a page. And
Yeah,
I think that can be quite overwhelming for families because
yeah,
they don't know where to turn. And I think the way that people get signposted to is really important. Like,
100%. Even just having a conversation with people makes a big difference. Um, and it kind of just came from, I guess, the experiences that I had. Like I said, I would kind of go in a Google search and just be like trying to find therapy, and then you kind of just go down a rabbit hole. You don't really know what you're doing. And a lot of parents that I've spoken to as well have ended up being signposted to the wrong things, and people that don't have the right credentials who will make these like ludicrous claims, um, you know. And when people want to support their children, sometimes I think there is a sense of desperation that people can exploit. So it's nice to have somewhere that you can come back to and just be fact check things or sense check things, even if we're not putting, um, even if somebody's not seeking a professional to work with, they can just come to us and be like, does this seem legit? And we can kind of sense check that for them as well. Um, because there's so many stories, it's actually quite shocking of people that have offered all these services and things that have just been, yeah, very strange to say the least.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess this is now more of a question to the audience. What things do you still see as struggles in the sort of neurodiversity support space? Where do you see the biggest issues within the pathway?
Sorry, so I was just I was just gonna go on to that really, just to ask Amina. When you speak about in terms of raising awareness,
Hmm.
obviously it's awareness regarding neurodiversity, so ADHD, autism.
Yeah.
I know you've got a lot of, plans in place as to
Hmm.
raising the awareness. Can you just speak more about how you will be doing? So will it be workshops based on specific topics, raising awareness on what it actually is, or what how to overcome it, or can you sort
Yes.
of just elaborate more?
So what I wanted to do was pair with professionals specifically. So, for example, at the moment, I'm going to have a chat with an occupational therapist who can really break down for parents and for adults how occupational therapy can support. What is occupational therapy? Sometimes it's just like the fundamentals of what that even means that people don't necessarily understand. So it's about breaking
That's
down.
right.
Yeah, so there's two sides to it. One is just about raising awareness about neurodivergence, the misconceptions, the different presentations. Even as we spoke as well about like creating culturally sensitive content as well for people from certain communities, like my own community, for example. There's so much misunderstanding. Um, so there's that side of things, but then the other side of things is talking about what can help. What are therapies? What are play therapies? What do they help with? What is speech and language therapy? What is occupational therapy? And for adults, a lot of adults don't know that they can have access to occupational therapy. What are the goals and the outcomes of occupational therapy? How can that help? Um, and then we also wanted to create content around things that happen around daily life. For example, relationships, looking at how neurodivergence affects relationships. How does it affect work, social life? So it's just so many different aspects, and it is difficult to cover that whole ground when you're kind of dealing with children and adults. But we have like a plan for how we're gonna tackle that. And it's not just me, there is a team and there are different people who are working on maybe the adult side of things and the children's side of things. And I do create content with professionals, especially the ones that are neurodivergent affirming. Um, so yeah, it's a lot of work covering all of that ground, but it's the awareness, the education, and then obviously the children and the adult side of things. But we do have a breakdown of how we plan to do that over the next year. And I'm always looking for professionals to collaborate with as well and to kind of spotlight and showcase, especially people that have lived experience of autism or ADHD, because there are so many amazing professionals who have lived experience and they offer like a different lens and a lot of understanding and empathy as well that I kind of want to bring awareness to.
Yeah, you're right. No, thank you. Thanks for that.
No worries. Any more questions for me or Ari or just sorry, I wanted to also say Samaya is working with me as well because she does coaching, youth coaching as well for children and she supports neurodivergent children as well, just based on her own background. If you want to introduce yourself, sorry.
You had to just put me in it then, didn't
Yeah,
you?
sorry.
No, it's fine. It's of course, I mean, my main purpose of this webinar was learning more about ultimately myself, and of course, EF sim. But yeah, as Amina mentioned, I am a youth coach, and I have been working with SEND and SEMH students for several years now. So it's really nice to be able to have that input in with ultimately just from seeing it, on a day-to-day lens inside the school and not just outside. But yeah, my main purpose of launching my youth coaching is because of working with students for, like I say, several years, just seeing that there's a lot more life skills, should I say, that that they need to that needs to be focused on when it comes to students, and it's a focus that it is there in schools, but I just feel like there's not enough. Again, it's just awareness, but it's basic life skills such as emotional intelligence, confidence, etc. But yeah, my aim is to just be able to help as many teens and adolescents as I can.
Lovely.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think that sort of youth coaching is so important
Hmm.
because I think it's so, like, I think we've seen the rates of ADHD are about 5%, but in the UK, only about 1 to 2% get diagnosed. And with EFSIM, we've seen that in Finland, where we operate, about 20% of the kids that we evaluate have some kind of executive dysfunction. And I think when you're a child with ADHD, you know that you are somehow different. You're perceiving that you're getting a lot more negative criticism from than the other kids. And I think if it remains undiagnosed and unsupported, it can lead to so many negative mental health issues as a result. But then also, if they're not provided with that support early on, they can develop maladaptive coping behaviors or just not learn how to cope. And I think it's such a shame that kids that could have, with fairly small improvements, been well supported are struggling. And yeah, as Mina mentioned, I personally have ADHD, and I was lucky enough to be diagnosed when I was 13. And I worked with a clinician who gave me a list of strategies similarly to what we do at EFSIM of, where specifically I was struggling and what I could do about it. And that was really helpful. And I think more helpful to me than even the diagnosis of ADHD, just the understanding of what to do about it. Because I knew that then, for example, if I was late to class or was struggling to complete an assignment, I knew that it wasn't something that was like inherently bad with me, but it meant that I just needed to work harder than the other kids to be able to perform at their level. But I've got so many acquaintances that I meet that often, especially at like sales events, for example, because a lot of innovators and founders tend to have ADHD themselves, and I keep meeting people that will say that they went to university, they lost routine, they started struggling with mental health in university because their grades started slipping. They didn't realize that's why that was happening, and then at like age 30, they're diagnosed with ADHD, and all of a sudden everything makes sense. And I think the better we can try to avoid that situation happening, the better.
Yeah,
Definitely.
no, definitely. I think when it comes to strategies, etc., it's important, but also I think what needs to be recognized, just like you say, is that um it's not a one size fits all. What works for one student or one young person or one adult is not necessarily going to work for the other person. And I think that's where the awareness, like Amina says, comes in. It's really important because I can see from a school perspective, that sometimes there is this kind of box that, okay, no, they should be meeting this need, or they should be, this should work, or this strategy should work because it's working on so and so. But we know that's not the case, and it's quite difficult sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Any final questions from anyone or thoughts? All right. Well, in that case, I'll start wrapping things up. It's been really nice to chat with everyone and to learn more about Autumnly and also Samaya, your work as well. I'll send you an email after this if that's okay, so we can chat more about FSIM. But yeah,
Yeah,
thanks
perfect.
everyone for joining on Easter on this like Easter break.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Harry.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.